A new AARP poll is offering an early look at the 2026 election landscape in Georgia. That election coming up very quickly. This poll specifically focuses on voters 50 years old and older, a key voting bloc that could decide races for governor and for the Senate. Two big races, really, the country watching. Adrion Bell with AARP Georgia joining us now to break down those numbers for us and what matters most to older voters according to that poll. Thanks so much for the time, Adrian. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you too.
So, what are the biggest takeaways from this poll in terms of Georgia as a battleground state?
Well, we surveyed more than 1,000 voters, and they were between the ages of, well, they were at least voting age, which is 18 and over. And then what we found was that out of that voting block, that the 50 plus were more motivated to vote than their counterparts. For example, the poll showed rather that 88% of Georgia voters who are 50 plus are motivated and rate themselves a 10 out of 10 on a 10-point motivation to vote scale. So you compare that 88% to where only 62% of those voters under 50 rate themselves that high. And our research has shown, and we've done these polls as an organization in the past, and what our research has shown us is that since 2002, the year that citizen voting data by age became available, those 65 and older have cast ballots at a higher rate than their younger counterparts. So we have just found out that, again, this year, that we expect the 50 plus to be a major part of this election.
And what does the poll tell us about the influence of this voting bloc, of these voters 55 and older?
Well, the things you mean, like the things that will influence them to vote?
Yeah, yeah. What would motivate
Okay.
them to be active participants? As you know, voter turnout's always a big question mark.
Right, right. The things that our survey found or our poll found that were going to be our major motivators were going to be the rising prices and accountability, social security, and the protection of that social security, and healthcare costs. And these are basically the three top issues. And then we found that threats to democracy came in at a higher rank as well in the poll. So, but those main cost and we call them pocketbook issues were the main things that were motivating our older voters.
Yeah, healthcare costs being a big one. I wanted to ask you about that specifically because sometimes that's kind of a hard one to address in a 60-second campaign ad. What do you think the biggest part of that conversation will need to be to reach this voting bloc?
Well, the poll didn't take a really deep dive into the variances in Medicare and Medicaid costs, but we're already hearing uh, the idea of expansion or the debate on the expansion of Medicaid. The current administration has a pathways program, so I think that people will be looking at, is that pathways program the actual answer, or is it going to be the expansion of Medicaid? And just the overall, even those 50 plus who are continuing to work, how are these administrations going to affect the cost of the health care that they get even through their employer?
You know, oftentimes, post elections, Adrian, we break down voter turnout and we do that based on age groups. And this voting bloc has been traditionally a more reliable voting bloc, perhaps, than maybe younger ones. Um, how does that really shape the conversation in terms of the lead up to election? Do you feel like the candidates are trying to speak to this group in particular because of the way that they can have that kind of collective power at the polls?
Well, the commercials for the general elections are just starting. So I have seen a few instances where they're starting to address them. But I think, that grassroots effort is going to be necessary to get into the voters' minds and listen to the issues. And the candidates in these races would be wise to not to downplay these numbers, and pay close attention to the things that are concerning the 50 and older. We showed that those 65 and older have consistently cast ballots at higher rates for more than the last 2 decades, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a major voting bloc, and so I think that they will start, you know, addressing these issues with this voting bloc.
All right, Adrian, before we let you go, as you took that deep dive into those polling results, tell me and the audience your biggest takeaway and what we should all be keeping in mind as we kind of see this uh, momentum sprint to this November finish line.
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind is are those issues that are going to affect the 50 plus voters. The pocketbook issues, as we call them, Social Security, affordability. And when we talk about affordability, we're talking about things like the cost of groceries, the cost of everyday items like gasoline. And so keeping those affordability issues in mind, and the fact that these voters are going to turn out as they have in the past. And so I think that those are the main things and the main takeaways that we found in the poll.
And it's interesting, Adrian, because all of the major things you're pointing to, all of those issues kind of focus back to affordability because Social Security, it's a fixed income, and there's concerns where will that be in a number of years. Healthcare extraordinarily expensive. All of that goes back to that same issue of that how do you get through that day-to-day life and let the dollars and cents add up to be able to get what you need.
Correct. Because Social Security, we found that 48% of the 50 plus rely on Social Security for their major source of income. And then when we get into the 65 plus voters, we found that 65% of those voters say that it's a major source of their income. So that's why it is a major issue in this election, because we're talking about things that affect everybody's everyday life and whether they are able to afford to contribute, continue to maintain the lifestyle that they've become accustomed to.
Yeah, everyday things. And if that Social Security for 48% of those folks is a set number and everything else in terms of prices going up around them, that makes critical decisions a part of everyday life. So, hey, is there anything I haven't asked that stood out to you in the poll that you think would be important for people to know before I let you go, Adrian?
I think that the main thing is you can find out more information because this poll talked about a lot of things. It talked about the political environment. It showed the favorability ratings of different administrations that are currently, or the administration that's currently in office. So if anyone wanted to go to that poll and find out a little more information, they can find links in an article that is listed on the website at www.aarp.org/GA poll.
All right, that's really good to know. But I do want you to answer that question. I think a lot of people on the edge of their seats now. How is this voter block showing us how they feel about favorability at this time in terms of like major candidates, maybe in the governor's race and the race for Senate?
Well, as far as like favorability toward those toward those candidates,
Yeah, did
I'll say one. Okay, yeah, I can address that. One thing I wanted to point out too is that the trend is even present in the primary because we found that voters 50 plus made up 68% of the Georgia primary. But as I go through my notes here, I can tell you that. Give me just a second. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling because this poll was extensive, so I don't know it all off the top of my head.
yeah,
But
take your
what we
time.
found. Okay, give me just a second. I'm sorry. I'm flipping
No,
through pages here.
you look for what you need to.
Um,
So 50 plus accounted for 68% of voters in the Georgia primary, which speaks to our conversation just a few moments ago that this has been a dependable voting bloc in the state of Georgia. So that's why this poll I know is extensive. And it's important because where this voting bloc goes can show a trend for maybe overall trends statewide. So I appreciate you searching for that information.
I definitely am. Um, I just found a little bit of it here. And also, I want to mention that we found that of the voters 50 and over, 12% of them are swing voters. So that means that they haven't decided yet, or 25% of those swing voters haven't decided, and then the rest of those swing voters, they may vote Democrat, they may vote Republican, or they may split the ticket. Now, when we looked at the candidates by choice, we found that overall, Senator Ossoff was ahead, excuse me, was ahead of Representative Collins by 52 to 43% in the general um, consensus. I mean, over the overall poll. However, when we came down to the um, the 50 plus, we found that Collins was ahead a little bit in the older segment of this voting bloc. The same thing happened in the governor's race. Keisha Lance Bottoms is ahead when it comes to the overall election. However, when we came to the 50 plus, she drags behind Rick Jackson by a few points in the 50 plus.
Are you looking at the split between Collins and Ossoff in the 50 plus? What's the flip on that? So in the general, it's 52-43. Do you see the numbers for 50
Mhm.
plus in front of you?
Yes, let me look here a little bit closer. Um, Sausage. I'm flipping through pages here.
No worries.
Do. Okay. All right. It looks like, for example, with Ossoff and Collins in that race with the 50 plus. Oh goodness, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay, here we go. Um, 51 to 46 when it came to voters 51 to 64.
Okay.
Um, but then when and so it breaks it down quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, and then Ossoff, but Collins in voters 65 and older is 61 to 37.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Wow, it's
Yeah.
really, I know, a
So
very detailed, in depth poll. I appreciate you digging in there for us a little bit. I think it gives everybody an idea of
not a
sort of
problem.
what you were able to do with this big cross section of looking at 1,000 voters. Adrion Bell, thank you so
Mhm.
much. We will make sure we get a link to the website so people can dig into more of that data and those numbers. And we hope to talk to you again as we get closer to November. Adrion Bell with AARP Georgia. We really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.